All right, today we're going to talk chapter 2. We're officially going to get started. So, your heading for today is chapter 2, cells. After thinking about it a little bit, I decided that our next test is going to be open note. So, make sure you write good notes. You can use your notes for the next test. So, make sure you write down what I tell you to write down. If in doubt, write it down. That will definitely help you for your test. So what I'd do is I'd start a new page and I'd write down chapter 2, cells. First, let's get a little history of cells. So there was this guy by the name of Robert Hooke, and he's one of the guys that gets credit for first seeing the cell. I believe in the early 1700s. And he actually saw a cork cell. By the way, write this down if you're not. But, he saw a cork cell. If you guys know what cork is, you can put it in like bottles and stuff. It's from a plant, a tree, and it's kind of the bark part of a tree. And the reason that this works so well for Mr. Hooke was that cork cells are really, really big. He did have a very simple microscope, but cork cells are big. You don't need a great microscope to see that they're divided into little cells. So it's kind of similar when we do one of our labs. We're going to use onion cells, not because I love onions or anything like that, but because onion cells are pretty big, and hopefully we can find them and see them. All right, so how did Hooke see the cells? He used a microscope. You don't need to write that. Kind of just some cool stuff. I saw this is actually a flea up close, so the reason your dog is scratching could be because of that. You don't need to write this. The first microscopes were very simple, and then as microscopes improved, so did our knowledge of cells. So the first microscopes were, I don't know if you call them microscopes, but they're basically just like one little lens, almost like a magnifying glass. And then as they got better and better, so did our knowledge of cells. It's kind of like most of you guys have a cell phone that you can do 1,000 things with. Well, when the first phone was invented, all you could do was like send one-word messages. Okay, and then it became where everyone had a phone in their house, and it had a cord and that kind of stuff. And then we had cell phones. And the first cell phones, if you've ever seen those from about 30 years ago, they were huge. They looked like a giant brick, and they had an antenna, and you couldn't get signal very well. But you could carry your phone around. That was like super cool. And then they gradually got better and better. I remember when the first cell phones came out that had a camera on them, and everyone was like, "Why would you have a camera on a phone? This is stupid. Why would you need to take pictures?" And now everyone takes pictures, selfies, videos, FaceTime, all of that stuff. Now it's normal. So something like the phone has gone from barely being used to constantly touching it all the time. So microscopes have been kind of the same way. They start out very simple, not very useful, and now you can see tons and tons of stuff. Another example that I use is the car. The first car in the early 1900s, very simple. It was basically kind of a little wagon that, instead of being pulled by a horse, had a little motor on it that would go about 5 miles per hour, and it was super cool. Okay, and then someone came along and said, "Hey, let's make this thing go faster." Okay, and then someone said, "Hey, let's put a cab on it and enclose it in case it rains." And then they added a radio, and they added lights and all this stuff. And before you know it, we have some pretty awesome vehicles like we have today. So Microscopes were the same way. Hooke's observations of quark cells led to the cell theory. So why don't you take a moment, write this down. Hooke's findings with the quark led to what we call the cell theory. And Hooke gets a lot of credit for this. There were some other guys as well. When you read it in your book today, you'll read this in a little more detail. All right, so why don't you write down cell theory? There are 3 things that are true about all cells that they call the cell theory. So just write down cell theory, and then we're going to list some things below it. So cell theory. The first one, and write this down please, all organisms are made up of 1 or more cells. All organisms are made up of 1 or more cells. This is true about all living things. It could be something like bacteria, which is 1 cell, to the big oak tree in your backyard, which is many, 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 many cells. So all organisms are made up of 1 or more cells. Make sure you're writing this down because we'll use it for the test. Cells are the basic units of structure and function in all organisms. By the way, if I'm going too fast, just pause the video and write it down. Cells are the basic units of structure and function in all organisms. Basically, you can't break down a cell any further and have it still be living. If I chopped a cell in half, it would just be a dead cell. There wouldn't be like, oh, I have 2 half cells. So cells are the basic units of structure and function. And the third one, oh, sorry, don't need to write this, don't write this. Cells make up all organisms and are involved in processes like digestion. The third one here, all cells come from other cells. We covered this last chapter with biogenesis. Living things come from other living things. If I want a skin cell, I need to have another skin cell that copies itself and reproduces. I can't just go collect some dirt and turn it into cells. Cells don't just poof happen. So those are the 3 parts of the cell theory. I guarantee you're going to need it for a test or a quiz. Guaranteed. And we will stop there. We will get into the parts of the cell later in the week. Have a good day.